welcome to episode 6 of the Thriving Life podcast, designed specifically to help you thrive rather than just survive the challenges of life, leadership, and faith. My name's Joel, and I'm joined today by Will Sutliff, who's our production director, which he's used to being on the other side of the camera and lights all the time, and we made him sit on this side. I'm going to tell you more about that in a second, and you're probably tempted to think this is going to be some geeky tech conversation or techie conversation about behind the scenes stuff here at Mission in terms of production, which I actually think could be interesting at some point.
Be fun.
I think there's people that would be interested in that. Instead, Will's going to give us a behind the scenes look into a multi-year battle with anxiety that he recently walked through in his own life. Before we jump into that, I just want to remind you to make sure you subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends. We want you to be notified each time we post new content. Also, again, if it's helpful or if there's phrases or things that are helpful, we'd love for you to post that and share it online just so we can get this content out to more and more people. That would be incredible if you would be willing to partner with us in that way. Will, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've sort of been a part of this journey, some up close, some a little distant, but I think this is going to be really helpful for people. And for our listeners that are joining us today, here's the thing. The reason we invited Will is we've just concluded this series in the meantime, and what we talked about this last weekend really connects with your story. It's a very practical look into what it looks like to find the strength of Christ in the midst of a difficult season. So I'm excited about having you here. Welcome onto the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I definitely am used to being on the other side of the cameras and microphones, so this should be fun.
It feels weird to welcome you to the podcast because you've been here for every single one of them. You've just not been on this side of the camera.
Yeah, for sure.
So I feel like there's varying experiences and levels of anxieties that people have dealt with in life. And, I think increasingly in our world, more and more people know of someone who's dealing with some level of anxiety. In some cases, it's mild. In some cases, it's very severe. And so I think this could be helpful to lots of different people. But before we get to that part of your story, give us a little background on you and your family, some highlights, where you grew up, your family now, how you got to where you are now in life.
Yeah, sure. So I'm not an Arizona native, but I've been here for a couple decades in two different stints. So I grew up in San Diego, moved out here when I was I think 12 or so, and basically grew up in this church. So we started coming to Mission back when I think I was in 7th grade when we started. And so I kind of grew up in this church. In fact, my wife and I were married in the Family Center. We were the first couple that got married in the Family Center in 2005. And of course, back then that was the main auditorium.
Yep.
So been around here for a long time. We went off to college, and then we moved to Austin for a while, my wife and I, and we just really wanted to get back here. We knew we wanted to start having kids. Both my parents and my wife's parents live like 10 minutes from here. And so we knew we wanted to come back, and we saw this job posting for production director at Mission, and I'm like, that's amazing. It's not only is it a chance to move back home, but actually get to work at, my home church. So now I've been here for almost 10 years. So it's
amazing.
That's been fun.
Tell us real quick how you got into production.
Oh man. So, I always say my first paying gig was in 7th grade for lighting. And it was basically a strobe light from Spencer's Gifts and a little 4-color light from American DJ from Guitar Center. And I helped my buddy with his Battle of the Bands for a talent show.
Nice.
We won $50.
There you
Split that
go.
4 ways, so I got $12.50, and that was launched into my lighting and production career. So.
That's awesome. That's a great way to start. Yeah. And you probably are going to be mad at me for saying this, but Will's sought out from a lot of people because of things that he's done here and outside of here. He's gotten a lot of notoriety. There's a lot of people that hire him on the side to do things, and he's gotten to do a lot of really cool stuff with that. Not only that, that's not the only value you provide here. You're very involved in the life of our church. You're a small group leader. You've been involved in several different kinds of studies and things that we're doing. You also serve weekly on our content team, helping us shape the sermon content every week. I feel like I need to promote that more to people because I get all the credit from people about the sermon content, and there's a whole team that helps put together that content and give me feedback, and we review on a regular basis. And so Will contributes in a lot of ways here. But in addition to sort of your background in life and kind of who you are, in that context, you have some very specific medical background that's important and plays into this story. So would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So my whole kind of journey and all this started back fall of 2018. Ended up in the ER. I started to feel some tingling in my hand that kind of went up to my arm and chest, and that's obviously scary when that happens. So paramedics came. They did all the tests they do and said, hey, you usually get this checked out. So there's kind of some abnormalities on my EKG, and so they recommended I see a cardiologist. And so I said, okay, I'm a young guy, I'm in my 30s, like this is
That's not what you want to hear.
not what you want to hear. And so I went through a journey of cardiologist, echocardiogram. I didn't know what any of these things were before. And wore a heart monitor, and basically discovered that I have this condition called SVT, which is basically just means that in certain times, especially when I was exercising, my heart rate would increase above 200 beats per minute, which is obviously not good.
Yep.
And so, luckily there was a procedure that could be done to correct that. But the whole journey of getting from, seeming like am I having a heart attack to that diagnosis, there was a lot of anxiety that I was starting to develop. And as it would turn out, the SVT is also comes often with a condition called panic disorder, which is people having panic attacks, anxiety attacks, all of that stuff. And that's not something I'd ever dealt with before in my life. Mid to late 30s, never had anything like that. And and now I'm experiencing those things.
Yeah.
So,
and it started early on. You just thought it was I'm pushing myself too hard when I'm running. You do triathlons, like that type of stuff, and then it was like, okay, there's something irregular. And then you had the episode with the tingling, and then you're going through all these tests. So all of that is sort of built up over time. It's compounding. It's starting to go not just from physical and the doctors, but now into your head, and it starts messing with your head and some of that stuff. And so talk a little more about that.
Yeah, and I would have thought that being diagnosed with the SVT would have been a relief, because I go, okay, it's something that I can deal with. I go and have this procedure, and no big deal. I can move on with my life. And it was through that season I started really amplifying with anxiety, and part of that was due to the procedure, the upcoming procedure going. My doctor said, you're young and healthy, you're going to be okay. Mortality rate on this is 1 in 1,000. And I'm like, that sounds like good odds. But if you had said like 1 in 1,000,000, that would have felt a lot better.
That feels better.
And
even 1 in 100,000.
Yeah, something. So, I had anxiety about that. And the core, it took a while to figure out what all was. Where's my fear coming from? Yep. And a big core of it was, based around the fear of death. And not necessarily, the fear of me dying. I feel secure in Christ. I know where I'm going. But, I have 3 young kids, and I was really worried about leaving them without a dad. I mean, I know that's part of your story. And,
sure.
That was really where the core of a lot of the anxiety was coming from.
Yeah. I remember sitting with you in a meeting, and it seemed like everything was fine, and we were all talking, and we were meeting, and it wasn't like we weren't talking about death or anything. And then all of a sudden you were like, I'm not doing well. And that meeting ended like right after that. And I remember they took you to the hospital, and we were all trying to help figure out, hey, how can we help Will? What's going on with him? And some of it we didn't know. And you've been pretty open about this related to your story, that for a while you didn't want people to know. You sort of kept it hidden. You didn't want to, it wasn't even really embarrassing. It was just, you didn't want to worry people, and you really didn't think it was that big a deal. And then even when the medical thing came, it was sort of like the other feelings and the other fears were still hidden. You were still holding on to those by yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even I had hoped I'd read a bunch of, medical journals and, internet. And part of that's bad. If you struggle with anxiety, stay off WebMD and stay off Google, cause that will take you down a rabbit hole. But I had discovered this article that said, hey, these 2 conditions, SVT and panic disorder, are often seen together. And in 86% of the cases, when people go through this procedure that I did, the anxiety and stuff goes away immediately.
And so that's what you were hoping for.
I was hoping for that.
But that's not what happened.
That's not what happened. I mean, I remember, being wheeled out to the recovery room, and I knew within an hour that it wasn't gone. Wow. I could just feel it.
Wow.
it was still there.
So the medical condition was fixed,
that was fixed.
and the doctor's going, hey, you survived. You weren't
good.
the 1 in 1,000, which was
good.
good. So you're good, but
Give
you're
it a couple
going.
weeks and then you can start running again. But I'm going, no,
I'm not good.
I'm not good.
I'm not
This
good.
other thing's not gone.
Wow. And so this is the crazy thing for me is pretty much everything we talked about in this series, you went through in this season. Like this wasn't in the meantime. This was I'm stuck with this thing. You know, I think about Paul Storn. I'm stuck with this thing right now, and I don't know how long I'm going to be stuck with this thing, but I'm stuck with this. And the medical procedure didn't work, and things don't seem to be getting better. And it's like, somehow I'm supposed to see this as a gift, like, which now looking back, I mean, I think you're beginning to even see we'll get to this in a minute, but some of the things God forged in your life in that season.
Yeah.
But the thought of not focusing on what's going on around you because you're trying to keep a job going and trying to be a dad and be a husband and trying to be strong for your family, but there's some things that are happening inside of you, and most of that you're probably thinking is bad. This isn't God working in me. Like I need to get out of this situation. And there was I'm with you in this. I'm gonna be here with you. You know, look towards me. This was the third part of the series, the remain in me. So tell us a little bit of the process of what it looked like for you to rely on Christ's strength and trust in God and what He was doing inside of you, just in that season.
Yeah. So, one of the things that that was really helpful for me, I can't remember if I heard this in a sermon, maybe it was from you, I don't know, or a counseling session.
If it was good, maybe
If it was
I'm
good,
going to claim
something.
it.
But, Isaiah 64, the potter and the clay, where, God is the potter and we're in the clay. And I remember hearing them describe how, sometimes it's a really, easy, gentle process of, reshaping something. And sometimes it's a violent process of a deep cut or a real remolding of something. And that's what I felt in this season. And that's what God was taking me through.
Yeah. Which that's challenging. I mean, we all want to be molded and made into something better. I mean, that all sounds really good, and that's how we usually see that. But anybody who's gone through significant, I'll say, character reconstruction or life reformation, like knows that usually it comes through some sort of pain and fire, and that's why that illustration is so strong. Here's the thing I know about this is in this season. So that illustration was something that led you to sort of go, okay, what does it look like for me to really rely on God in this season? How did you make that jump?
Yeah, and really it came from I had become really good at hiding my anxiety. And not just from, work, friends, family, my wife, but myself.
Yeah.
We're talking decades of buildup. And I gotten really good at hiding, the fears that come from self-reliance. And that's really where the problem was with me. I was relying too much on my own strengths, too much on myself. And, it reminds me of the Corrie ten Boom quote from, your sermon this past weekend. You never know Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. And that was kind of that season for me where I'm going, okay, I can't rely on myself in this. The
Self had become unreliable.
It had become unreliable. I was essentially, I can control my thoughts by, hiding them inside. But I mean, they were physically coming out in manifestations. I mean, with my heart racing, full body tremors. I mean, the anxiety that would come out during these times were definitely, I couldn't hide them anymore.
Yeah, that wasn't in the notes. And I think that's brilliant. In fact, if I had a piece of paper here, I'd be writing notes down. So I'll go back and listen to this and make a note. But that is something we should all take away from this. The reality is self was always unreliant. It was always unreliable.
Yeah.
You just didn't realize it until everything else had gotten pulled away, everything else you'd sort of relied on, everything else you'd sort of hoped in, whether it was the surgery or whether it was your ability to fight through this or whether it was the support structure around you, which we'll get to in a second, which was important. But at the end of the day, that's not what saved you. That's not what rescued you. It was a shift of putting hopeless reliance, which you didn't realize it was hopeless, but hopeless reliance in yourself, to beginning to rely on somebody or something that actually could could rescue you in this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about, I mean, because of the proximity I had to this, I know you didn't do this alone. Talk about the important roles other people played in this difficult season. You alluded already to, a conversation with a counselor, but talk about in general about the roles other people played.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you mentioned in your sermon, Paul didn't need the support of the Philippians, but God often does use others for encouragement. And I mean, I have an amazing family support system. They've all been super helpful and encouraging. And, one of the most unexpected parts of all this was how reciprocal people were to not only hearing what I was going through, but also sharing what their struggles were.
Wow.
I mean, it blew me away. I can't even count the number of people who have opened up to me as a result of me opening up and being willing to share. And I think that's just something we need to do more of.
Yep. And that's healing for both of you. There's I was just having a conversation the other day with a friend of mine. We were talking about recovery, and the reality was he was saying that part of his recovery is when other people share what's going on. When somebody walks in the first week, they're also somebody that he's grateful for, because as they share, even if they're starting out, even if it's just at the points where they're going, okay, I need to stop being in denial, I got a problem, that adds to his recovery. Like, that actually is encouraging for him. And so I just think that's a powerful principle that we don't often recognize.
Yeah. And something else that was important was seeking outside help, not just from family, but, from the professional, medical counseling community.
Yep.
And, the reality is we have these people here to help. And, I went through some counseling for a while, and that was super helpful. I guess you can call her a counselor. I mean, I think half of what she did was just pastor me.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know her. I call her a spiritual director.
Exactly what
that's
she
my,
is.
That's my
exactly
term for her. She's a phenomenal counselor, and she's got good training, but she's a spiritual director.
Yeah. I mean, the truth that she would just speak to me in our sessions about who I am in Christ, who God created me to be, is just something that I'll carry with me the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And also she encouraged me to seek out a psychologist, which I've had a big stigma when it comes to medicine. I'm not one to want to do any of that or be any part of any of it, but she really encouraged me that, hey, it's okay, especially for a season to seek this out and to stabilize yourself, and that was a big part of it. I had to stabilize myself so that I could work on it.
So that you could deal with the root issues, and then you could break away from it.
Yeah. And hearing from pastors like Louis Giglio, when he was here, and some others, Larry Osborne, share their struggles with anxiety and their use of meds through a season to get them through stuff, that really gave me some comfort and encouragement that, no, this is okay. I need to do.
I was actually thinking about that this morning. I didn't know that you were going to mention that, but I remember, and I think about that, and I think we often miss this, and we under-spiritualize things. I'm not saying this is the only reason they were here, but what's the coincidence that in the middle, I mean, I remember this was in a really acute season of anxiety for you. We host an event, the Passion Tour comes in, and Louis' whole talk is about his battle with anxiety.
Yeah.
And I just remember, I just felt like, I was thinking this morning, that's just the kindness of God. Recognizing, an individual and going, and there's probably a whole lot more there that night, but in your case, recognizing this is the truth Will needs to hear tonight, and I'm going to deliver this him in a powerful way. And it was a powerful evening.
It was big.
So I don't want to move on too quickly, but I do want to talk about, I want this to be super practical, because somebody who's listening either knows somebody who might be beginning a battle of anxiety, or maybe it's starting where earlier on where you were discounting it, but you were feeling that. So either somebody who's starting out or knows somebody who's dealing or starting to have a struggle with anxiety. What would you say to them?
Yeah. I think, one of the most helpful things that my counselor told me was, hey, you're going to get better. Wow. And I remember, I think it was one of the, if not the first session.
Just like that, with that kind of confidence.
You're going to get better. And I just remember thinking, I can't see how that's possibly true.
Yeah.
And she said, you are going to get better. And just hearing that encouragement was really helpful for me. And, and I think I'm living proof that if you bring your struggles to God and you work through them with God, He will get you will get better.
Wow.
And so, that's been important. It doesn't mean it's going to magically disappear.
Yep.
That's certainly not my story, but this process of remolding has been really, really good.
Well, and from a professional, coming from a professional that speaks that confidently and almost in faith, gives you an opportunity to borrow on her faith to go, okay, wait, if you're that confident and you're a professional and you've walked through lots of situations like this with people, I can begin to believe. I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, but that sounds like what you're saying. You
Yeah.
sort of started going, okay, if you believe it, I'll open myself up to trying to believe it.
Yeah.
That's
and,
cool.
and the other important part is if you have someone that is in your life that's starting to deal with this stuff, that other than Christ, the most amazing help for me was my wife during this whole time.
Wow.
I mean, I just cannot overemphasize how amazing she is. And, through the roughest weeks of going through this, she never tried to, rationalize away my fears. She never tried to, or she never got frustrated. And, for when you're going through stuff like this, it feels so real to us, and you as, the partner, the friend, doesn't necessarily feel that same. A lot of times the anxiety that we feel is not necessarily rational.
Yep.
That might be rational, but the reaction or overreaction isn't. And so for her to just allow me to go through this season and to not try to rationalize it away was really helpful.
Yeah. Or minimize it.
Or minimize
I
it.
remember too, going back to that meeting that we were sitting in, I remember after you'd left, I remember a couple people going, what happened? Did somebody say something or whatever? And I was like, I don't think that any of this has to do with any of us. Like, it's just not related to any of our conversation, what's going on. It wasn't like we were talking about some gigantic event that was going to punch a bunch of stress on your life. Like, that's just not what was going on. And we all want to try to figure it out and rationalize it. And oftentimes it's not rational.
Right.
Like, it's even the fears that we have. I mean, we all realize life's a breath. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow, but some of the fears that you had were exaggerated and they weren't as rational as you might have thought they would. But for you in that moment, what you're saying is it was real.
Yeah.
And your wife going, okay, this is real I don't understand it, but this is real for him. You're saying was a big part of that.
Huge part. Yeah.
So legitimizing what they're feeling and just going, gosh, I don't fully understand that, but I believe you. And just going, hey, I want to sit in this with you.
Yeah.
What did you learn about that fear specifically from a spiritual perspective?
One thing that I've noticed a lot more is just how much the Bible talks about fear and anxiety. And there's just so much scripture that talks about it. And I think it's just because all of us on some level deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's obviously, a big topic. One of the books that I read going through this early on was Joshua. And one of the things that struck out at me was, here's a guy who seems like such this like valiant warrior, confident, fearless guy who God is constantly telling him that, hey, you need to not fear. And it's like, why are you having to remind him? And, even the most valiant, warriors, leaders still need to be reminded that, God is in control and not to fear. And
well, Joshua had been the one who was courageous in the past. He wanted to go into the promised land. Nobody thought he was fearful. And yet when he becomes the leader in the very first chapter, 3 different times, God commands him, be strong and courageous.
Yeah.
And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm that, but it, I think there's a very real, like, and again, this is another conversation we'd had, but just how sometimes we need to be obedient in that. Like there's an obedience in the steps that we take to be fearless, to be confident, to be strong. That's not because of our inner strength. It's because of the one who's instructing us to do so.
It's funny. I don't know why or when, it was a long time ago, I picked a life verse which I'm sure some of you guys have life verses. I don't know what the circumstances were, why I thought I needed a life verse, but I ended up picking Joshua 1:9 for some reason, which is funny because I never thought I dealt with fear and anxiety in the past. And for some reason, I chose this verse, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And, that's a verse that I would go back to over and over again through the season of putting my trust in God.
You mentioned that Psalm 23 was a pretty big deal as well for
Yeah.
you in terms of finding comfort
Yeah.
in the midst of your anxiety. What specifically about it?
Yeah, just the picture of God leading me through that valley, and knowing that I'm not alone. He's there with me, and on the other side of that, is comfort.
Yeah.
So that was really comforting to me.
I even like the construction of it. Even though I walk through the valley, it's not like I'm walking into it. I'm just getting stuck here. It's, hey, this is a valley, but we're going to go through this.
Yeah.
And we're going to get on there, and I'm going to lead you through it. And I love, I've talked a lot about this, but when he talks about his rod and his staff, and it's like, hey, I'm going to hold you close. I'm going to use that staff to hold you close. And I'm going to use the rod to direct you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And that direction and protection that God promises in the midst of that is a huge deal. So bring us up to date.
Yeah.
How much are you still dealing with anxiety now? And what does that look like in your life? And how are you managing that?
Yeah. Not nearly as much as I did. And part of that, the key to staying on top of that is to, externalize my thoughts and fears. And, I'm someone who is an internal processor, and that has been part of the downfall of this is I just want to internally process. And, you got decades of buildup of not dealing with that, not externalizing that. And that's what can lead to that. So by me opening up, either whether it be through journaling, that's one of the things I do is I'll write down what, especially if I'm feeling anxiety, I'll write down what are some truths about God, truths about me, and what are some lies of the enemies? What are some lies that the anxiety is telling me? And, externalizing that on paper and then externalizing that to God through prayer has been really helpful. And then, being open and sharing with my community group, with my wife, my family, friends, has been really good at helping me, keep the anxiety at bay.
I have a friend who told me, who's dealt significantly with anxiety, and he told me that he's taken a really clinical practice, which you may recognize when I talk about this, and he's changed it into his own ways. When he has a fear, one of the things the way he externalizes it is by saying, "So what?" Okay, so I fear this. So what? What does that mean? What's going to happen next? So, well, if that happens, then this. Well, so what? Well, if that happens, then this. Well, so what? If that happens, and it's like for him, the externalizing that and taking it to its worst conclusion,
Right.
and going, okay, that's not as bad as
It's not as bad as you think.
as I would think.
Yeah.
So I think that's super powerful. How do you balance that with? Because I know that could get difficult even in a marriage relationship. Like if you're always externalizing to your wife, you're going to drag her into your anxiety.
That's true. I don't think she would describe me as over,
that's
over
true.
extroverting.
Yeah. But for people like me who are extroverts,
Sure.
that's a very real possibility.
Could be, yeah. It's actually been amazing for our marriage, to be honest. We are stronger now than I think we ever have been.
Wow, that's
and part of that has been how she's leaned in, and then how I've been able to lean in as well. And so we have more, better, deeper conversations now than we ever have. So yeah, it's been
well, and
good.
she's a special person, so
Yes.
that's a cool thing. So I sort of, to wrap this up, you had this unique insight that sort of brought full circle our whole series, and it was so good. I was tempted to steal it and close the podcast with it myself, but I think you should share it with people because I just thought it was super for the people who've been tracking with us in this series, which we've received a lot of great feedback from. I just felt like that brought the whole thing full circle. Would you just share what you shared with me?
Sure, yeah. No, I was just out on a run this morning, and I was just kind of thinking through all this, and getting ready for this. And
I got to interrupt you, which is ironic. You're on a run.
I'm on a
which
run.
is where
I'm
a lot
back
of
to
this
running.
started.
I'm
You're back to a
running,
run,
which has been so good. And I was just thinking about how grateful I am that God would see enough value in me to actually want to work on me. And that's kind of overcame me this morning, and to think through it, like an unloving, non-existent, out of there God
Distant.
wouldn't do that.
Yeah,
Distant
right,
God
sure.
wouldn't do that. And, we have a loving God who cares so much about us. Not only did he create us in his image, but he loves us so much that he won't let us stay where we are, and he is there molding us.
I think for somebody out there today, I'm not saying God caused this, but no matter what you're experiencing, I mean, the takeaway is you have a God that loves you and he values you so much that he wants to use anything and everything, as the scripture says, for your good, for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. It's ultimately for God's glory, but it's for the good of the people he loves and he values. And this seemingly bad thing, and this is what I always get this question as pastor: why do bad things happen to good people? Why doesn't God just keep? Well, this is a primary reason. And you just described the personal growth as an individual, your growth in faith, how you feel closer to God. Your marriage has grown significantly. That's going to have a major cascading effect into your children's life and into their children's life, into generations. There's just so many good things that come when bad happens and we allow God to intervene. We allow God to flood our circumstances with his truth and his help and his hope. And that takes some work on our part to look towards him. And I love that you allowed people around you to come around you. And I love that you reached out to a counselor. You were open to the professional opinion she was giving you related to medicine. But the thing I love most is at the end of the day, you've come through this and you look back and you go, no, this was what the Apostle Paul said when we started this series. This is something now I can consider joy. This trial I can consider a joy. I can be grateful for these trials because of what it produced in my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have any last thoughts?
No, that was it.
Will's a man of few words.
I'm going to get back to the other side of the camera here real quick.
I've been making him say a lot of words. So thanks so much for joining us. We'd love to hear from you. If you got questions, please email us, send us messages, leave comments in the video. We'd love to hear from you. And if you got specific questions, we'll definitely be sure to follow up with you. Thanks, Will, again, for being willing to share your story with us here. And we hope to see you soon. This weekend at Mission, we're starting a brand new series, and I could not be more excited about it. It's called Rebooting Life. There's lots of talk about reopening America, reopening Arizona. In the midst of that, I think it's going to take a little time for that to happen, but as we talk about rebooting life and rebooting sort of the economy and rebooting society, I think we need to talk about what does it look like to reboot our lives and what should be recovered, if everything should be recovered or some things that shouldn't be recovered, and what do we need to recover from. So we're going to talk all about that in this series. I hope you'll join us. That's this coming weekend. May the 3rd is when we kick that series off, and we'd love for you to join us. Other than that, we'll see you next time here on the Thriving Life Podcast.